Hi, everyone. I'm Erika Blumenfeld. And yeah, thank you for being here with me today. And a really warm thank you to Nico, Carter, and Sam Correa and Katie Frey for inviting me to share my work with you as part of their summer art series. I'm really excited to share this new work with you. And I'll be talking today about my collaborative print edition with Island Press, which focuses on the hand-drawn notations that were made by the Harvard computers on the photographic glass plates that they were studying. And I'll give you a little background on that history and how I became interested in the women's work. But first, I thought I would take a minute to introduce you to my own work. And so I'll share a few images from various projects over the years while I give some general context about my practice. So I'm a research-based artist, and I work across disciplines and focus on many intersections between art, science, nature, and culture. And I'm curious about the places where our phenomenological world meets the human experience of wonder and meaning, the extraordinary events that had to occur for us to even have a universe, a planet, and a habitable natural environment are sources of both wonder and meaning for me, and these become the motivations behind my creative inquiries. Since 2011, I've further focused on the material composition and origins of the cosmos as both a literal and symbolic link to our connection to it. And my work as a whole is interested in cultivating, excuse me, an embodied relationship with the cosmos, and an experience that we are in our very chemistry of and from the stars. I hold degrees in both photography and cultural heritage conservation science, which becomes important in terms of how I began thinking about my project with the Harvard computers notations. And my work leans towards archivistic and scientific methodologies where I tend to source artistic meaning from the materials and subjects themselves. So I began my artistic path as a photographer nearly 35 years ago in high school with an immediate love of working with early photographic processes, and in particular with dry glass plate negatives like the ones that comprise Harvard's Astronomical photographic plate collection. And I grew up around the Boston area, and eventually my parents moved to Cambridge, just 2 blocks from Harvard's Observatory Hill. So on my walks, I would see the white telescope domes and imagine what the view of the sky might have looked like in the much darker nights of the late 1800s. It is perhaps no surprise then when I learned about the Harvard Astronomical Plate collection and the legacy of the Harvard computers, I was just captivated. The plates contain so much that inspire me. The rich scientific data and cultural stories illuminating human exploration and knowledge seeking, our longing to learn from the stars, the significant people and science that arose in their wake, and their continued import in contemporary research. Their work contributed to the eventual scientific explorations that has confirmed the remarkable statement, "We are made of star stuff," a topic that is deeply embedded in my work over the last 10 years. This idea that we are made of star stuff is attributed most often to Carl Sagan, but the concepts and the words themselves had been put forth by a handful of scientists dating back to the early 20th century, including Harvard College Observatory Director Harlow Shapley. In 1929, Shapley is quoted in a New York Times interview as saying, "We are made of the same stuff as the stars. So when we study astronomy, we are in a way only investigating our remote ancestry. We are investigating our remote ancestry and our place in the universe of star stuff. Our very bodies consist of the same chemical elements found on the most distant nebulae, and our activities are guided by the same universal rules." I want to dive into those ideas more deeply, but I want to first pause and provide a very brief historical context for those who aren't as familiar with this history. In 1881, the Harvard Observatory began hiring a group of women who are known as the Harvard Observatory computers. From various backgrounds and levels of education, and at a time when women struggled for basic rights and freedoms, let alone roles within the sciences, these women would come to revolutionize the science of astronomy and astrophysics through their discovery, study, and cataloging of hundreds of thousands of stars deep sky objects, and astronomical phenomena. Their work centered around the glass plate negatives that was part of a huge effort to map the sky. These plates, spanning 100 years, are now being scanned by the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics DASH project, which stands for Digital Access to a Sky Century at Harvard. The project is digitizing the plates in order to produce photometry of the entire sky for current study of time domain astronomy and astrophysics. It is a truly significant and heroic effort that will allow researchers to, among many other things, search for exoplanets through comparison of the collection's 100 years of image data. The collection comprised 500,000 glass plate negatives of the stars taken from 1882 to 1992, thousands of them directly annotated with beautiful research-based drawings on the glassy side of the plate, inked by the many hands of the Harvard computers. I'll highlight just a few of the women computers who are most well known. Wilhelmina Fleming, who began her career at Harvard as Harvard College Observatory Director's housekeeper, was one of the first women officially hired as a computer for the observatory. Fleming worked on spectra and dwarf stars and developed a classification of stars based on their hydrogen content. She also discovered 310 variable stars, 10 novae, and 59 nebulae, including the famous Horsehead Nebula. Henrietta Levitt was a graduate of Radcliffe College and worked primarily on cataloging the brightness of stars. Her discovery and resulting famous paper studying 1,777 variables in the small and large Magellanic clouds, which are visible in the southern hemisphere, led her to discover the period luminosity relationship in certain variable stars. Now known as Levitt's law, her discovery established a standard candle with which to push the boundaries of parallax and triangulation in order to measure the great distances across space. Her discovery allowed astronomers to measure the width of the Milky Way and ultimately understand that there were other galaxies beyond our own, and that the universe as a whole is expanding. Her discovery has continued to have far-reaching impacts on astronomy and space exploration today. Annie Jump Cannon produced a stellar classification system based on the star's temperature and spectra, which became known as the Harvard Classification Scheme and is still used today. Cannon was made an honorary member of the Royal Astronomical Society and was one of the first women to receive an honorary doctorate in math and astronomy from a European college. She classified by hand a total of around 350,000 stars, discovered 300 variable stars, 5 novae, and 1 binary star system. I want to thread back to Shapley's statement about star stuff, for it holds key meaning for me in thinking about the materiality of the glass plate collection and the notations. It is a profoundly poetic truth that in the deep investigation work of the Harvard computers, they were looking into a veritable cosmic looking glass. And in notating the plates, we're inscribing a kind of origin story, the story of the incredible link-up of the stellar cosmochemistry and processes which coalesced to a moment in time when a human being had the knowledge and tools to reflect on the formation of those stars. The marks themselves have both a literal and poetic meaning, the human hand touching the stars. This is why, when I learned that in order to achieve clean scans of the stars for the DASH project, the glass negative is wiped clean of the women's notations. At the time I learned about this, already 425,000 plates had been scanned, and any markings that had been on them erased forever. I was relieved to learn that every plate with notations was photographically documented, and that 100 or so marked glass plates that depict significant research and discoveries by the Harvard computers have been set aside and preserved for posterity. But still, my heart ached that the women's marks, which read like beautiful drawings and depict an aesthetic searching and exploration of the stars, were now invisible to the human eye, like so many of the stars that were the subject of their work. I immediately began to wonder how I might preserve the women's notations through art and to find a way to return their marks to the stars once again. For my print edition with Island Press, I began searching the database for plates that had been erased of notations before being scanned. There was no easy way to do this. I searched the PHaEDRA notebooks for pages that were tagged as showing plate numbers, and then would enter each plate number into the dash plate search to look and see if it had markings. Most of them didn't, and so I would keep searching. Sometimes I would arrive at a plate that had interesting markings and also had notes on its envelope indicating that the star sequence was marked on another plate as well, and so I would search for that plate. In all, I estimate I searched several thousand plates over a 4-week period, and in that time, I found literally hundreds of plates with beautiful markings. In order to narrow them down to 6 plates for this edition, I decided to let the markings themselves guide me, to choose a selection that showed a diverse way of looking at the stars across the years from 1892 to 1935. So I thought I would show you the 6 selections, and since it is rarely known which women marked the plates, I'll share some of the research and expertise from both Nico Carver, who is the librarian for collaborative programs at Wolbach Library, and who is also an astrophotographer, and Lindsay Zroll, who is the curator of astronomical photographs at the Center for Astrophysics. This plate shows the Magellanic Cloud and was exposed on October 19, 1897. Nico notes that the plate was used in Henrietta Swan Leavitt's work comparing variable stars in the SMC that eventually led her famous discovery of the period luminosity relationship. The plate was referenced several times in Leavitt's 1905 notebook. Lindsay also notes that this plate would have been used by Levitt since it is of the swell Magellanic Cloud and was taken during her era of reaching Cepheid variables in that region, researching Cepheid variables in that region. There appear to be 2 different types of handwriting on this plate, both in black ink, and the marks look to be a mix of magnitude measurements and some sort of counting system. This is a scan from one of Leavitt's notebooks from 1905, where she is comparing stars on the plate I just showed you to stars on other plates, and you can see that up in here, the plate number is noted. This plate is of the small Magellanic Cloud and was exposed on October 19, 1897. Nico notes that this plate number shows up on page 11 in the 1903 notebooks of Levitt. In her study of variables in the SMC, she notes variable off edge. And Lindsay notes that the plate appears to have 2 different types of markings. The black are from an earlier era than the red, and that the notations look like proper motion marks that have been seen on other plates. This plate has become one of my favorites, and I found it through resource material that Sam Correa from the Project PHaEDRA shared with me in my early research. It was exposed on October 2nd, 1901, and Nico notes that the star that's encircled by the mark is a small star named DB plus 10 4095, and that the way the mark is made may have been a way to find the star again by using the bright star Markab, which is the one that appears right above the line. The plate is referenced on page 18 in Henrietta Swan Leavitt's 1904 Miscellaneous Observations notebook. This plate depicts the large Magellanic Cloud and was exposed on November 16, 1923. Lindsay notes that this plate appears to have either galaxy count work or globular cluster counts, which would match up with the time period. Galaxy work was a priority for women in the stacks between the 1930s and 1940s. There are a few magnitude measurements scattered here and there as well. The purple ink is contemporary with work done in the 1930s and 1940s. Unfortunately, the envelope is modern from the early 2000s, and there's no annotations to tell us exactly who did the work or what they were looking for. This plate depicts the large Magellanic Cloud and was exposed on November 28, 29 in 1929. Nico notes that this plate depicts a patch of the sky just a few degrees north of the center of the large Magellanic Cloud, and may include the top edge of the satellite galaxy. Lindsay notes that this plate has initials on the paper envelope, which indicate that Harlow Shapley used the plate for proper motion work in 1932, and that William Luyten used it to look for changes in the sky using a blink comparator. This plate was exposed on November 3rd and 4th in 1935. Nico notes that the plate depicts the border area between the constellation Taurus and Auriga. The brightest star in the photo is Alnath, but most of the markings are on stars in the constellation Auriga. Lindsay notes that she's only seen a handful of plates of this type, with this type of marking, all in the RL plate series, where there is a type of blocking off of a specific area of the sky. And she additionally notes that there are a few Messier objects marked as well, M14, M18, and M19. So it has really been a joy and a wonderful honor to be an artist in residence with Island Press and to have the opportunity to work with their director, Lisa Belowski, and their master printer, Tom Reed, on this print edition. And after many initial conversations with them, talking about the glass plates and the notations and looking at various early photographic processes and thinking through myriad printmaking materials, and the process for this project began to take form. And the resulting work is an intaglio made from laser-etched plexiglass of the women's notations that are printed onto a starlight exposed cyanotype chincolé, where we then gild the clear inked notations with 24-karat gold leaf. Working with student interns from the Sam Fox School of Art, where Island Press is housed, the large cyanotypes were made by twice exposing and developing the paper for a total of 40 minutes of direct sunlight exposure, which produced the deep twilight blues for the print's background. We worked with the dash photographs of the plate markings that were taken before the marks were wiped from the glass, and then essentially did the opposite. We digitally removed the stars from the marks, maintaining the original composition of the marks within the boundary of the plate. The digital file was then etched into plexiglass, which would become the intaglio plate. Inked with a clear base, the plate was then pressed the cyanotype chincolé into the Hahnemuhle copperplate paper and lay the clear ink marks down on the cyanotype surface with a slight embossment. Then, when the ink was nearly dry, the marks were gilded with 24-karat gold leaf, which is a process of that requires extreme concentration and care, much like the original making of the marks themselves. I'm going to share what has evolved as the final prints for this project, and also some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about as I wrap up the project. There is an elegant symmetry in thinking about using the photographic medium to capture the light of the stars that are invisible to the unaided eye, for it is the process of photography itself. For in the process of photography itself, there is an invisibility to the image until it is developed and fixed. This poetic latency is something that comes to mind for me again and again when considering the women's marks being wiped from the plates. We know that the marks were there from the documentary photographs taken of them before they were wiped, but the marks themselves exist only as the now latent pressure of the human hand upon the photographic glass plate surface. You can no longer see the evidence of this embodied gravity, but it is there somewhere inside the glass. In reflecting on elegant symmetries, it is also a remarkable thing to consider the composition of the photographic emulsion, and specifically the silver that makes it light sensitive as being itself a byproduct of stellar processes. So when the silver is sensitized with the light of another star, it is, in a sense, the stars meeting across time. The entanglement of these materials and conceptual ideas of latency and presence, of human and cosmic timescales, and of elemental reciprocity is still unfolding for me as I finish this work. The marks are the material evidence of both the women's passion and devotion for their research and the stars themselves. thinking of their lifelong mark-making as a poetic gesture of exploration, and imagining that in one sense, perhaps they were the first humans to touch the stars, tracing as they were light across the cosmos. To render their marks in gold, an element that was formed in the collision of neutron stars, seems the perfect material with which to return their marks to the stars by retracing them with star matter. The cyanotype is made on encoir paper, where the paper's surface is chemically sensitized with an emulsion and is then exposed entirely to natural daylight. Once developed, the image, which is a surface of deep twilight blues, is simply a recording of our star's light on a diaphanous fiber substrate. Like any photographic print, this starlight recording holds within it the material meaning of the medium's moniker, phos and graphy, to draw with light. In reflecting on the invention of the cyanotype process and also the word photography, it is interesting to note that both are credited to astronomer John Herschel. Herschel invented the cyanotype as a way to copy his scientific notes from his astronomical research, and so this photographic process became for me a symbolically relevant medium to render the scientific notes of the Harvard computers. The sole source of image illumination at the inception of the photographic medium in 1839 was our sun, a G-type main sequence star. So you could say that the stars have been collaborating with the photographic medium for 182 years. The photographic glass plate negatives that recorded Harvard sky's century recorded the light of myriad star types, which were meticulously studied and revealed by the women who marked the plates. In this way, their marks, these interstellar drawings, become again the expression of embodied motional topographies and surface-dwelling fluid tensions, but also the gravity force of the press as it orbits the intaglio plate and paper, revealing an elevation of their marks. Then, just as early atomic elements accreted out of nebulous possibility, so too does the elemental form of pure gold coalesce with the embodied ink layer forming a material bond that renders the text as star matter. And raised, as it would be, above the print's own horizon line, their marks become, once again, star-bound.